big embarrassment afterwards to try and keep it out of the media because people would rightfully point out there's a huge security risk.
Some members of Congress are calling for an investigation of Google for secretly tracking iPhone users all over the internet, even users who thought they had blocked that kind of surveillance.
You see this pattern emerging over and over again. So look at Google Street View.
Google agreeing to pay $7 million to settle with 38 states over its Street View car's collection of data from unsecured Wi-Fi networks. The Street View vehicles equipped with antennas and open source software gathered network identification information, as well as data frames and payload data being transmitted over unsecured wireless networks as the cars were driving by.
It's a great tool for, say, tourists or homesick transplants, but privacy advocate Kevin Bankston says Google is being too invasive.
There are a lot of people on the web who are, I think, freaked out by this. They find it kind of icky and uncomfortable.
And so absent the fact that it got caught and they were fined and that they tried to cover up some of the things that they were doing and the media got wind of it, nothing would have happened to them.
The new Google Home Mini has a massive problem, and it isn't even out yet. It was released to reporters for free last week to test it out. One journalist discovered his device recorded everything in earshot and uploaded it.
More and more people are beginning to use these smart devices in their homes. There's two things to it that I think people need to be aware of. The fact is that it's always on and always listening, so it's collecting an enormous amount of data on their users. The other thing is the fact that it is only giving you one answer back.
Okay, Google, how tall is a T-Rex?
Here's a summary from the website animals.nationalgeographic.com. Fossil evidence shows that Tyrannosaurus was about 40 feet long.
I think it's something we should be aware of what's happening with the bias that's being introduced because more and more people are starting to use these units, and certainly children are using it. And kids don't have the ability to discern that it's a biased result.
According to a new report by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, schools are collecting and storing kids' names, birth dates, browsing histories, location data, and much more without proper privacy protections.
They went into schools and they offered their Google Apps for Education for free to schools. What they weren't telling anyone was that they're actually collecting information on our kids secretly, and they're using this for profiling purposes. We just don't know how that information is going to be utilized against them. It could be utilized against them when they apply to college. It could be utilized against them when they go in for a job. It could be utilized against them for insurance. It could be utilized against them whenever you want to buy something online. And they're taking that information and they're weaponizing it against our own kids. And guess what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing happened when the FTC heard about it, when the Department of Education heard about it. They took no action.
So Google grew out of a PhD program at Stanford, right? They have this affinity for academics. They view themselves as academic a little bit in nature. Their campus looks like a college campus. So Google provides a ton of funding for academic institutions, individual academics all around the world. So we found something like 300 papers that were funded by Google in some way that supported Google's policy positions.
They like to say, hey, we have the country's foremost academic experts behind us, and what they're not telling the public is the fact that they're actually funding these so-called independent experts, these so-called independent academics.
Eric Schmidt was testifying before Congress about whether or not Google was a monopoly. He was relying on an academic study to bolster his point, but he didn't disclose that the paper was actually funded by Google.
Are you concerned that your company has been, quote, exerting enormous power to direct internet traffic in ways that hurt many small rural businesses, end of quote?
Extremely good and well-meaning small businesses move up and down in the rankings, but we are in the rankings business, and so for every loser, there's a winner, and so forth. I am satisfied that the vast majority of small businesses are extremely well served by our approach. And as I said earlier to Senator Klobuchar, I do believe that if anything, our system promotes and enhances small business over larger businesses because it gives them a hearing and a role that they would not otherwise have because of the nature of the way the algorithms work.
Google has blacklists, and the biggest blacklist they have is called their quarantine list. Now, I'm guessing very few people have ever heard of this list, and yet I'm telling you, it not only is a tool of censorship, it is by far the biggest and most dangerous list that Google maintains for the purpose of controlling information. The quarantine list is a list of websites that Google doesn't want you to visit. Are there 1,000 items on this list? No. There are millions of websites on this list. Google has the power to block access to websites. And there are no relevant regulations. There's no oversight. There's no advisory group. There's nothing. No one even realizes that Google is doing it. There was a particular day where Google shut down the entire internet for 40 minutes. This was reported by The Guardian. Google did not deny it. They shut down half of the internet in Japan. And again, they acknowledged it. We are talking about a company with so much power. Well, who gave Google the power to shut down the internet? Where did that come from?
They should say, look, we are liberal or left-wing organizations. We don't want to give a forum for others. Yeah. And then I have no issue.
Well,
but they say that they are a public forum
over our information.
And that's not honest.
Google has this ability, because they're such a large platform, to act as the world's most powerful censor. And it's a power and a tool that they use on a regular basis. Consider a simple case involving an eminent scholar, Dr. Jordan Peterson of the University of Toronto.
Canadian professor Jordan Peterson shot to fame when he opposed a transgender law that infringed badly on the free speech rights of Canadians. Now, his speech is being suppressed in a different way. Google blocked him from his YouTube account. We don't actually know why, because Google refused to specify.
I made a couple of videos at home criticizing a new law that was set to be passed in Canada, purporting to add gender identity and gender expression to the list of protected groups under Canadian human rights legislation. I was objecting to two parts of the legislation, and one part was what I regarded as compelled speech, and that was the provisions in the policy surrounding the law, making it mandatory to use pronouns of people's choice, mandatory under punishment of law. And the second is that it writes a social constructionist view of gender into the substructure of Canadian law. That's wrong. It's factually incorrect. So we now have a legal system that has a scientifically incorrect doctrine built into it. And people don't understand how dangerous that is, but I understood how dangerous it was. And that caused a real media storm, I would say, that in some sense still hasn't subsided. Google shut off my Gmail account and blocked access to my YouTube channel. And by that time, my YouTube channel had about 260 videos on it and about 15 million views and about 400,000 subscribers. So it's a major YouTube channel. But they blocked access to my mail as well, which had everything, like all my mail from the last 20 years, basically, and my calendar data, everything. They said that I had violated their policy. They said, first of all, that it was a machine that flagged me, but then it was reviewed by human beings, and they decided to continue the ban. They gave me no reason. They said I had violated their policy, but it was completely vague, and I got no reason at all. Now, I've received all sorts of conflicting reports, and so I really have no idea why it happened. I can't be certain that it was political targeting. But that's really not the point in some sense. The point is that it was arbitrarily shut off. And that's a real problem. You come to rely on these things, and when the plug is pulled suddenly, then that puts a big hole in your life.
Before January 1st, 2012, I just never gave Google a second thought. I just thought it was cool and used it like everyone else does. On January 1st of 2012, I got a bunch of emails from Google saying that my website had been hacked, it contains malware, and that they were blocking access. I really got curious. Why was Google notifying me? Why wasn't I being notified by some government agency or some sort of nonprofit organization? One thing that I thought was curious was they had no customer service department. So here, they're blocking access to your websites, including my main website, except there's no one you can call to help you. That I thought was very odd for a company that big and that cool. access was being blocked not just through Google's search engine, not just through Google's browser, which is Chrome, but access was being blocked through Safari, which is an Apple product, and through Firefox. And I was thinking, how could Google impact what happens when someone is using another product like Firefox? And it actually took me quite a while to figure out how that all worked. So that's really the event that took place early 2012, New Year's Day, that started to get me to look a little more critically, a little more professionally at Google, figuring out how this company operates. How do they do what they're doing? How big is their reach? What are their motives for doing what they do? And, you know, over the years, the more I've learned, the more concerned I've become.
Well, Dr. Robert Epstein is a world-renowned psychologist, and his work gets a lot of attention from the media. In fact, the Washington Post ran a story on the very question that Epstein had been researching. And that question is, could Google actually tilt an election? And the article was fascinating. But what's even more troubling and fascinating is what happened the day after that article appeared. That's when Google decided to shut off Dr. Robert Epstein.
The next day, I could no longer access Google.com. I mean, you're seeing something here that probably very few people in the world have ever seen. You are seeing a timeout on Google.com. So I started, asking around. I started doing some research on it, and I actually found how a company like Google could, in fact, cut you off from their services. I also found in their terms of service very clear language saying they had every right to cut you off from their services whenever they pleased, with or without cause.
When Google decided to go after Robert Epstein and Jordan Peterson, in a way they were making a mistake, because these are two individuals that have a lot of contacts in the media, have a lot of relationships, and can draw attention to the fact that they are being censored by Google. But consider somebody who's had the spigot shut off by Google who doesn't have those kind of relationships. What happens to those people? Those people essentially disappear because Google has decided they don't want you to hear what they have to say.
You started just having smaller content providers that's doing incredibly, innocuous things on reviews of movies and expressing an opinion on something that somebody at YouTube apparently objected to. It could be a critical review of Wonder Woman, and all of a sudden the video gets demonetized.
They're no longer there to be discussed. That's the problem with censorship.
These companies want to present themselves as only interested in the bottom line, only interested in serving customers. But when you look at the pattern of behavior, you look at the censorship and the manipulation and the one-sided nature of it, and you can only come to the conclusion that these companies have a far deeper agenda than they want to let on.
Google is definitely the biggest kingmaker on this earth that has ever existed, because it can make kings, not just in the United States, but pretty much in every country in the world.
That's the thing, is people are playing with forces that they don't understand, and they think they can control them. Kingmakers aren't always benevolent forces by any stretch of the imagination, and especially when they're operating behind the scenes.
Google and Facebook has the power to undermine democracy without us knowing that democracy has been undermined. If the major players in tech right now, and that's mainly Google and Facebook, banded together and got behind the same candidate, they could shift, we figured, 10% of the vote in the United States with no one knowing that they had done anything.
Epstein came from a background embedded in psychology. He's a Harvard-trained PhD whose work on search engine manipulation effects has been published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And essentially what they set out to do was to say, if we present people with information in a biased way through a search engine, can we steer them and change their opinions? And what they found out consistently again and again, that yes, it was easy actually to shift and steer people's opinions in the direction that they wanted them to go.
The way we studied this was with an experiment. We start with a group of people who we know are undecided on a particular candidate, and we guarantee that they were undecided on the election that we were going to show them because